Good evening. I would like to call to, welcome to the Monomoy Regional School Committee meeting tonight, Thursday, December 2nd, 2021. This meeting will take place partially remotely pursuant to the law signed by Governor Baker on June 16th, 2021, an act extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, which includes an extension until April 1st, 2022 of the remote meeting provisions of his March 12th, 2020 executive order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law. This meeting will also be recorded. May I have a roll call at 6:33? Roll call in the Zoom room. Jackie?
Here, Jackie Seabrat Long.
Sharon? Sharon?
Aye. Present.
Danielle?
Present.
Tina?
Present.
Nancy?
Present.
Terry?
Present.
And I am here. Without objection, I would like to skip down to number 1 under reports and discussion, the Mass Division 7 All-State School Committee Award that is presented to our very own Terry Russell by the Mesc President Ellen Holmes. Would that be okay?
Yep.
Any objections? All right, so welcome, Ellen.
You're welcome.
And I appreciate you giving me this opportunity to come down and present this award. It means a great deal when we're able to recognize members, especially because as a school committee member, it is not a common phrase for one to say thank you or recognize your service. Even when people feel that they appreciate you, it's nice to be able to have someone express that. So I appreciate this opportunity. The MASC All-State School Committee was established to annually recognize significant achievement on the part of local school committee members. This recognition is intended to honor school committee members who have made a significant contribution to their community or their school committee, either through specific action or as an inspiration and role model for their peers and constituents. Terry Russell has been an active member on the Monomoy Regional School Committee since its inception 11 years ago. His focus has been on children and providing them the tools to be their best selves. Whatever direction the world may take them, Terry strives to ensure they will be prepared and contributing citizens. His background demonstrates a clear commitment to the value of public education and a passion for learning. He served the community of Barnstable for 40 years as an educator, 30 years of which as an administrator, 25 of those as its middle school principal. This work alone is significant and deserving of recognition, but at a time when some make the mistake of assuming retirement equates with a withdrawal from dedicated service, Terry joined a critical volunteer group of individuals passionate about their communities and the young people who represent our future. People often share their thoughts and perspectives of how best to run a school district, but it is so true that actions speak louder than words. The moment an individual steps up and offers to serve on a committee of a school or a district is important to acknowledge. Terry has referenced his first step was volunteering to serve on the Harwich High School Building Needs Committee. That pathway led to the work of these two communities making the decision to form a regional school district, memorializing that in your regional agreement. And when the time came to make the decision to build this regional high school, Terry invested himself in the work of the building committee and underscored the need to communicate fully with all your stakeholders. The need to recognize what one has been fully immersed in is not what most of our neighbors have had the time to do, which is precisely why a school committee member must primarily be a good listener. To appreciate where different individuals are coming from on the matters that impact their lives, yet keeping the focus on our most cherished responsibility, our students, our children. In the discussion regarding the appropriation of funds for the school in July of 2012, Terry remarked, "If not now, when? And if not this, what? If in worn condition, school facilities can present a hindrance to effective instruction. In healthy condition, they allow for greater access for all to learn, academically, physically, and social-emotionally. Facilities are an essential element in the education of all students." Like many school committee members, Terry's advocacy relates to his family. A member of the Harwich community for over 5 decades, this is where Terry and his wife Anne Marie chose to raise their children. The connection with the school community is extended to a 3rd generation, as their 2 grandsons have been educated through this educational system. The investment of time to ensure the quality of educational experience for his grandsons motivated his service for all children of Harwich and Chatham. As he noted, this created an excitement of ownership of the schools. It also drives his excitement when encouraging community members to take part in the variety of volunteer and community opportunities in the schools available for those who are interested. His leadership contributes to the work of the Monomoy School Committee and District. His previous administrative management work provides a strength in his school committee work in the fields of curriculum, negotiations, and finance. As the first chair of this committee, Terry navigated the challenging early years of a regional school district collaboratively with his colleagues. He continues to exhibit his passion for lifelong learning as a supportive and trusted colleague who generously shares his institutional knowledge to show how the past can inform forward progress for Monomoy and its young people. Most importantly, he recognizes and values the importance of the team and the value of debate and dialogue to accomplish the positive work that needs to be done as a school committee member. All stakeholders are important, as this collaborative spirit will support the tremendous potential of all your students being realized, and that's an amazing gift. Terry contributes his talents to collaborate for positive accomplishments and outcomes for this community, and again, especially its children. He is the personification of the engaged citizen as he actively models the voice of an educator, active community member, elected official, valued and trusted colleague, and one committed to family. As such, he epitomizes what an all-state school committee member represents. Division 7 and Monomoy Regional are extremely lucky to have him as a colleague. On behalf of MASC, I am honored to officially recognize Terry Russell as a 2021 All-State School Committee member. Congratulations.
You got that, Joy? Thank you, Ellen, for those kind words. I paid close attention because it didn't sound like me. One thing I mentioned, you reviewed some Barnstable 40-year history. 40 years there and 25 years, 30 years. That makes me 92. This is, well, I said to my wife, or I said to 2 folks here, this is my awards receiving jacket. I've never worn it. Keeping in mind Jackie's thought of simple in 1 or 2 minutes, I have a sharing, and I couldn't match your signal to me, so I will cherish those words, Ellen. Thank you. Thank you to Tina for the kindness of your nomination. To all my fellow committee members, past and present, it's been my privilege serving with you. To my wife, Anne Marie, this is her first school committee meeting this year. Let's give her a hand. She's been my faithful navigator, my advisor in all things good. We both have loved this regional journey. What a gift, taking my son Mark's place on the new Monomoy Regional School Committee. What a gift joining the new high school building committee, meeting and working with committed, creative, and passionate public servants from Howard and Chatham. The past 11 years serving on the regional school committee has enriched my retirement years. It gave me a challenging public purpose. Clearly, I gained more than I gave. Thanks to Dr. Carpenter. It's doctor tonight rather than Scott. His last name is Attell. He and his team have built a new school system into a welcoming and dynamic home away from home for our students and our staff. Speaking of home away from home, I will end with a true story. Years ago, Emery and I took a trip to Nassau in the Bahamas. A dear friend of ours, as a pastor, was launching a new church building project. He created a unique and powerful event for the church groundbreaking. He invited his parishioners to bring a small amount of soil from their home to the church building site, home soil. As they emptied their home soil into the future church's broken ground, they strengthened in symbol their community connection, a home away from home. Years later, I stole or I borrowed that idea, and I shared it with our superintendent and building committee. On a cold, dry day years ago, just about where my wife and Joy might be seated, we started our big dig as we broke ground for this new Monomoy Regional High School. With the help of dozens of Howard and Chatham future high school students that started our big dig, that's an easy word, big dig. Home soil from Howard and Chatham with the hope it would sprout seeds of creating challenge, new friendships, kindness, high expectations, and hopefully a lot of fun. Those seeds have sprouted all around us, in Chatham Elementary School, at Howard Elementary School, in Monomoy Middle School, and here at Monomoy Regional High School. Home away from home. Thank you all.
So congratulations again, Terry. That's quite an accomplishment.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
So moving on, let's go back up to public comment. Do we have anyone for public comment? Seeing none, we will move on to the approval of minutes.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I move to approve the minutes from November 4th, 2021.
Second?
I would second that.
Any discussion? Roll call vote. Jackie?
Aye.
Sharon?
Aye.
Danielle?
Aye.
Tina?
Aye.
Nancy?
Aye.
Terry?
Aye.
And I am an aye.
Madam Chair, move to approve the minutes from November 18th,
Do I
2021.
Second?
Second.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call vote. Jackie?
Aye.
Sharon?
Aye.
Danielle?
Aye.
Tina?
Aye.
Nancy?
Aye.
Terry?
Aye.
And I am an aye. Moving right along, we will go underneath reports and discussions to number 2 and with an update to the international student trips for 2021 and the 2022 school year. Dr.
So-
Carpenter?
In your packets, since last we met, World Strides has, in response to where EF Tours is, has matched the EF Tours and that sort of travel protection. So I've provided in your packet what EF Tours has on their website and their travel, their COVID care promise. And so World Strides has now extended that date so that our trip would be covered under this. And then on the second page of it, you'll note that they dropped the meals and lodging up to such and such an amount that was there last time, just saying that meals and lodging are covered, and if there's a need to have someone there, that a parent or chaperone will be flown in on their dime. So my hope is that we see things improve, and of course, between last meeting and now, we have Omicron, the gift that keeps on giving. So, so I don't know what travel's going to look like. As I was driving here today, my son was informing me that the U.S. military may be putting an end to our trip over the holidays. So
Wow.
who knows? It's so international travel. I think there's a lot of people that are just a little angst on seeing what Omicron does, and I'll talk more about COVID as we just hit the bi-monthly COVID report.
Any questions or comments for Dr. Carpenter? Nancy?
It's the mask.
It's always the mask. We had a third trip,
The
right?
the third trip got postponed. So.
Okay.
So the only one on the table right now is London?
No,
So,
Costa Rica.
so London, Costa Rica. So they,
Oh.
so they have, they currently have, as long as the parents and students understand, the big wild card right now is that, while you can travel to London and Costa Rica, unless perhaps you're U.S. military, you can, it's when you need to return home, so there's testing, you need to test negative before returning home, and that's, there's some angst that everybody needs to understand that somebody may have to stay behind, and at least both of these trips are not going to have that be a financial hit that the families are going to have to take.
Tina, did you?
Yeah, I just wanted a clarification, because at the last meeting, we had talked about the possibility, and possibly the reality, even if one student tests positive, they are still within the group, and I just was curious, I don't know if it needs to be in writing about what happens if the whole group is quarantined. I guess that's my only concern. I was just trying to scan, I don't know if we need anything like that, or does this cover it? Because that's my understanding sometimes in the quarantine, is that if, they're going to be traveling as a group, and they will be, what's the word I'm looking for? Close contact, thank you. So I just don't know if that at all needs to be clarified in here, because it might mean that everybody has to stay for a bit of time. That's my only concern.
Any other, or you're going to go back for
I can
Yeah.
get clarity and.
Nancy?
I just want to make sure, so the testing requirement is for the return trip home, but they may not be experiencing symptoms. So if they test positive, even if they're not experiencing symptoms, that would still cover them? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm trying to read the fine print of it, trying over and over again just to make sure, but, so as long as, if they test positive, regardless of symptoms or not, they'll be covered-ish.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
But I think we can get some clarity, Tina, on the, what if it's, what if it's quarantining? And the quarantining is really the local agency on the ground is going to be determining that.
Right, right. I just was concerned that, like, if one student does test positive, they've shared a room with XYZ, does that mean XYZ stays? And was XYZ in contact, it could be a ripple effect. So I just was curious if they've thought that through.
Danielle?
About the pre-departure testing, who is responsible for facilitating that? Is it the program leader or is it World Strides?
Yeah, they would, I believe that World Strides, and again, I can get some clarity on that, but I believe that that's part of what, it's part of the program that, so that you're going to get to the airport and some recognized agency is going to be having to swab everybody. But I'll make sure that that's World Strides or EF is covering it.
Okay, I think that's important to know exactly how that process will go. Will each student be receiving 1 or 2 tests? When will they be administered? Is it at the hotel before they leave? Is it, what, I think learning a little bit more about the process for pre-departure testing would be helpful.
Anything else? All right, so moving on to number 3, the regional agreement meeting with the Chatham Select Board. Dr. Carpenter, is that you as well?
Sure. Michael and I met Tuesday with the Chatham Board of Selectmen to go over the same slide deck that we've shared with this board on the regional agreement and the financial pieces behind it. I think some broad stroke things, I think they too, as a group, seem to be honing in on maybe it would be best to have this be 2 steps and to have the financial piece addressed to sort of narrow the focus of what we're taking to town meeting and pick up the rest later. I had suggested that it might be good if we, in the very near future, bring that working group together and get consensus, and so that way we can start really honing the conversations with DESE on this. But Michael and I also had a meeting with Mark Terry, who subsequently has had more conversations with DESE, and I think even DESE thinks that might be a good approach. So I think it sounds like all the parties are on board. We just, so that we can put forward the red line version that we're moving forward and focus in our public meetings with people, here's the red line version, line by line, what's changing and why. But we did walk everybody.
You have 2.
We did walk everybody through the finances of it, and I think that the board, I think in concept, I think understands and appreciates the financial reason why we're doing this. There were some things that the board did bring up. There's a want to make sure that there's provisions within the regional agreement so that there could be universal preschool. And one of the things that I shared with the board is that we have to keep in mind that if it's universal preschool, that the school district is operating, because the school district's operating it, it would have to be happening happening in the Chatham, on the Chatham side and the Harwich side. But I also shared there are things that can be done at the town level to accomplish universal preschool. And again, I want to emphasize, preschool means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So is it preschool like what the district currently does, which is this half-day integrated preschool, that there's learning and social skills that are happening there? Is it half day like is happening at the Rocking Unicorn, or is it some sort of full day preschool that has some daycare involved? And I know, for my own family, when we had children that were preschool aged, we needed the latter one. And although the school district offered preschool, it was not accessible by our family because it didn't fit what we needed as a family. So I think if, what I shared with the board is if it's done on the school side, the challenge will be, it needs to happen in, what we've heard back from DESE is that it needs to happen in both towns, the way the regional agreement currently reads. Alternatively, there could be some sort of partnership where the town partners with a program like the Y, where you're running a preschool with a partner in the town, in the classrooms that are available at Chatham Elementary School. Our integrated preschool would push into that program, so you could accomplish a universal preschool, and it could be for 4-year-olds or 4-year and 3-year-olds. And then alternatively, there's also the model that Orleans most recently passed in October at their town meeting, where they passed $495,000 so that every Orleans family with a 4-year-old is allotted $10,000 to use for a preschool program that they want, and everyone with a 3-year-old is allotted $5,000 to use in a preschool that they want. So, and again, Chatham, if you looked at how many 4- and 3-year-olders that there are, it should be significantly less than $450,000 to approach it that way. So we sort of shared that there are challenges. The way, if one wants to talk about preschool, there's things that we can do. There's things that the town can do on that. There were also several on the board that brought up a want to have some sort of either oversight board or potentially even having Chatham have its own school committee. And we talked, at least I shared with them, some of the things that I think are challenging, and I think that even those towns in the Nauset region see as challenging, where how do you really get the vertical articulation that we've actually put in place here at Monomoy if suddenly one town is potentially doing something different in its elementary versus the other elementary. But again, things to work through and discuss. A concern, sort of big picture concern I have is anything beyond the changes on the assessment piece, or even just the changes that have been already put into that red line and vetted by DESE. If we were to substantively change anything, I worry that it's going to derail us getting everything to a town meeting, and I worry that fiscally not addressing the regional agreement at the upcoming town meetings puts the district in a challenge, because I think at some point I anticipate that those that control the financial purse strings in Harwich are going to sit there and say, enough is enough. The challenge is that a move like that ultimately comes out of our bottom line, and ultimately comes out of the bottom of what we can do for the kids in both towns. So that's my biggest angst with regard to that.
Any discussion? Tina?
I don't know if this is appropriate. I did watch the video. Is it okay if I just ask for clarification on a couple of comments? I heard a concern expressed about the roof of Chatham Elementary School, and then there was some conversation about an MSBA loan. So, and then there was another comment about, I think, breaking off into their own elementary school committee. So I know that there were a lot of things discussed. So a question I have, hypothetically, if they break off into their own elementary school committee, does that change anything? Because I know when you're a regional school system, there are benefits, right? So if they break off, do they lose any benefits by coming out? I mean, I guess when they were talking about that, I started thinking and curious as to how that might work.
So we get, I would love to say that being a region, there are huge financial benefits. There are benefits in terms of sharing. So I think when the district came together, there were 2 central offices. When there was 1 central office, there was a lot of savings. A lot of those savings with regionalization came out of that. So potentially you put in place something that you start to now replicate what was, and there becomes more cost potentially. Nauset has done this, and the towns in that system have created a superintendent union. So there's one superintendent, and there's a piece of that job that's Brewster, and a piece that's Orleans, and a piece that's Wellfleet and Eastham and Nauset. So there are regions that have come together and created some structure with a sort of a superintendent union that way. The only on paper financial gain you have with regionalization is transportation. So if so when I was at Lincoln Sudbury, the Lincoln Sudbury buses, we could go and write off a large portion of the transportation. So the state gives regional school districts regional transportation money that helps offset that bus line, and it's an expensive piece of the school district's budget. The town of Sudbury didn't have that, so because it was a funky system where Lincoln had its own K-8, Sudbury had its own K-8, so the transportation on the K-8 sides, they weren't regional, so that wasn't offset. So there are some expenses that are incurred when you're not
Right.
fully regionalized.
Right.
Sorry.
Danielle?
I'm a little confused. I've heard this suggestion before, and I'm trying to just understand what it would mean if, some folks are interested in Chatham having their own elementary school committee. Does that mean, or would that mean that the elementary schools would be taken out of the regional agreement then? Or is that ostensibly what that means, or I don't I'm trying to understand that.
I guess again, so potentially yes, and I think the worry I'm just expressing is I don't know that all of that, all the logistics on all of that is going to get worked through in time for town meeting, given the pace the glacial pace that some of this can take, and then I worry about the financial ramifications if we don't do something. How's that going to impact the bottom line? But but in the case of the Nauset system, their elementary schools have stayed out of the region. So in theory, you could, one could uncouple, but you could imagine that the uncoupling is going to take a lot of massaging and everything to have that, and you could go create something that looks akin like next door. It's.
Nancy, did you have something?
Yeah, I think the follow-up on what Tina was asking, and I'm wondering, I have no idea what direction you were going, but you made me think of something, so.
Okay, good.
The MSBA.
Yes.
So when the whole reason the region came together was to start out with Harwich needed a new high school, and the MSBA was not willing to give them funding without trying for them to find a regional partner. And therefore, we have the regional partner. So I wonder if, and I don't know enough about MSBA to know whether or not if Chatham decides to pull out of the region, Chatham Elementary, and they need a new roof, if their MSBA might say, yeah, we're not going to help you because you decided to go on your own in that sense. So I don't know if that's where you were going, but that's.
That was exactly my question, because when I watched the video, I had written down a note to myself that if Chatham has its own school committee, would they still qualify for an MSBA loan? So that was a concern I had.
They would qualify,
My
but-
gut would be
Or
yes.
to be able, okay.
I think where it came in the formation of this high school was more I think it was the state pushing back and saying, we don't want to build a whole bunch of really small high schools. So what we want you to do is see if there is a partner that you can partner with to have a high school that's at least 700, that, has an occupancy of 700, as opposed to, having in the future a new small Harwich High School and then down the road some new small Chatham High School. So I think the state was sort of pushing some smaller districts towards regionalization by saying no. When I was off Cape, there was something very similar where the poor little town, using it, not poor as in economically poor, but the small town of Maynard was located in between all of these other towns who had already regionalized, and Maynard had its own high school. And it was a very small high school, and they wanted to build a new one. But before the state would say, Maynard, you can build a new high school, Maynard had to go knocking on each of the regions. I think they had 4 abutting regions that abutted Maynard, and had to go have each school committee say, no, we're not looking for another partner, before they could go back to the state and say, we tried, there was no one to partner with. Now will you give us the money? And the state did then.
That clarifies. I was just, because I will admit, I don't know everything about MSBA, or whatever it was, MSBA. I just wanted to understand how that worked. And if you don't mind, Madam Chair, just a couple of comments about the school committee, if they were to pull out. And I thought the answers you gave to this question were good, because I believe, would they be responsible for hiring if they pulled out on their own school committee? And the other question, which was curriculum, which you did answer, because I think the concern as your separate school committee is there has to be some link on the curriculums, because Harwich Elementary could have its curriculum going, and if you've got your own school committee, they might make other decisions. And then when they reach the middle school, are they both prepared? Have they had the same curriculum? So I was just jotting down a lot of notes of what might have to be considered if that is truly an option that they want to think about. Because I'm just a little concerned about some of the synchronicities.
It was coming from the system that I was in, where it was 2 separate K-8s. It was a little challenging, it was like this 3-party dance, trying to make sure that you have one party say, okay, well, we're going to offer twice as much of this. Well, it's like, okay, ideally you want to have the kids, as they were coming out of 8th grade, that everybody was lined up to go into the same level of math, not to have, kids from Lincoln, half a year ahead, and or ahead in science or behind in math, and that's one of the advantages, I think, that the way this district did come together is that there is this, and I think Mark and before Mark Carla, I think, have done a wonderful job of getting that vertical articulation in place.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just heard about this afternoon, so I don't have any answers or further any clarity regarding the potential for Chatham to have their own elected school committee to oversee the K-4 future Chatham Elementary. A couple of add-ons, though, just because of institutional memory. You're right, Scott. The agreement to build this school was based on Howard in need of a high school. And Chatham was a match because they were losing kids, and they needed a serious look into combining. It was reinforced when we began to look for some funding, which fortunately for all of us came out to be, I think, 51 cents on the dollar, a $5+ million saving through the project. But in order to promise this money, Desi was saying, is there any way you can make this experience larger? But the first thing, we already had word from Chatham they were interested in joining. The next step was to make this a larger school. We announced we were going to have the 8th grade, which would be at Monomoy, at the time Chatham High School. We announced that we'd move the 8th grade up here to still make a fairly small school of about 650, projected towards 700. So that movement was kind of a belated decision on the part of the building committee to make certain we were going to be able to get some funding from the state to make that 8th grade. And some folks in town said, gee, 8th graders, how's the fit? Well, fortunately, with the shrinkage of a lot of schools in the district on the Cape, many of those Cape districts were doing that, specifically Barnstable, which went from 7,500 students down to about 56. And so when I was experiencing it, our 8th grade moved up to the high school, which at the time, several years ago, you couldn't touch it because Barnstable High was, with an addition, 2,200 students, 9 through 12. So things were changing to fit that. My last comment about the school, interesting. This started out about 3 years ago as we saw the fairness or the unfairness of the way the regional finance assessment pointed out. Clearly legal. We never intended it, I don't think, 11 years ago with the founding group. But as it turned out, primarily because of the shrinkage of kids in Chatham, as the system grew from year to year, the Howards began to realize they had to pick up that 75% of the shrinking Chatham elementary school kids. We've been talking about this for about 3 years. And then we started to talk about 2 years ago with, well, what would be the solutions? How about shifting 4th graders over there and enrolling everyone so that, and that didn't go over well for everybody, but there is no everybody's solution. But out of that came the discussion of how we create a fairer assessment. And so about 2 years ago, we got in touch with the Select Board in Chatham, the awareness of the Howard Select Board, and discussions through a working group began, several meetings, mostly all virtual, which unfortunately that's the way we had to do it. And the model that Scott and his team came up with was, let's take a hard look at both elementary schools could finance their own operation. Simple, but not easy. And so we looked into that, breaking down, and Michael, as of about a month ago, firmed up those numbers, how it would all look. And it looked like if you did that, the overage, if that's what you want to call the Howard subsidy, would work out almost evenly to switch. Well, from that topic, that financial issue, has spirited out very naturally, not that it's surprising, out of some Chatham-interested folks, that, well, if that's the case, why don't we have one whole vote? Or why don't we have our own school committee? Or why don't we have pre-K? All good stuff. All discussion stuff. My last thought. If we proceed on this tack to even bring some resolution of fairness to those 3 little topics, one of which may be already somewhat resolved, we are looking at least 2 years of further discussion. We would never reach this June town meeting deadline, which we've talked about for over 2 years, in both towns. Just wouldn't happen. I'm kind of echoing what Scott said. Thus, the fear that in our township, that 600,000, 800,000, whatever the number is, will be absorbed with no retroactivity by Howard for another year or two as those 1 or 2 or 3 other elements get worked out. So that's where we kind of find ourselves as of this evening, even though the discussions will continue. So it's kind of, unfortunately, too bad 2 years ago that maybe the Chatham board didn't think of these questions then to see if we could iron it out, but that's where we find ourselves. When it was all brought up originally 2 or 3 years ago, we never said, now, wait a minute. Monomoy Middle School, formerly Chatham High, they need a roof. Well, we better slow walk this thing, because what we're thinking of, or did we as a committee say, oh, and Chatham Elementary needs a new roof? So we better either accelerate that in good faith, or find out where it belongs, as we heard 2 weeks ago from Michael, in some capital steps, because we don't want it to look like we're going too slow or too fast. So what started out to be as simple, let's have both towns pay for their own elementary schools. No other school committee, finance breakdown money, has now developed into far more questions than many of us have answers. So one, yes, I think it would clearly delay it if that's a route that some folk want to go. And yes, I think it will just compound a potential fracture in the town of Harwich after we're into the year that might have happened, meaning it could have happened this year, except no one's fault but our own when we realized the vote had to be an annual town meeting, not in last October, which would have started, if it all went well, with the payment being shifted. So now we're into 1 year that Harwich has moved right along without too much major issues around that. But further items are just going to bring all of a sudden a stop. And Scott, and we've talked about this for a year, and I think our citizen Charles, who really involves himself in the goings, said it very well, that I wouldn't want it to come to the fact that whatever that amount of money is, it's grown from 300 to 500,000, 600,000, all out of our budget, 75% of it, for the support of the kids in Chatham, which is fine. I wouldn't want our select board to say, our budget next year will take that hit, subtract it. Because if that happens, the 300 or so Chatham kids, K through 12, will be directly impacted just like our kids. They would be missing either class size, it would have to go up to make up that much of a default. So how do you solve that? I guess we try to either clarify and then move towards the spring. Thanks, ma'am.
So, hold on one second, Danielle. So, as I kind of recap this in my head, do we have a plan for the working group to come back together? Do we need a plan for the working group to come back together?
I would say, I don't know if it was the chair that was convening the working group or Tina or whomever, but I think we should try to pull that group together before the holiday and come out at the beginning of the year with a decisive, we're going to do everything that's in that red line, or we're going to focus the red line on just the financial piece.
Okay.
Because Michael and I are supposed to go on the 4th of January and start the public forums on this is what the change to the regional agreement is going to look like, and go line by line.
Okay.
And it's a big difference if we're talking everything, or are we just focusing on the financial piece with an explanation of, yes, there's a lot of obsolete stuff in here. At a subsequent town meeting, we'll be focusing on that piece and any other topics that come up then.
Okay. So when the working group met last, the members from the school committee that were on it were Terry, Tina, Nancy, and Joe, correct?
Yes. Yep.
So do we need to add a member?
Yes.
I'm just not sure. So Tina,
Do you mind
if
if I
wanna-
just make a comment? Yes.
Okay.
So let me just kind of back up a little bit. So when we put the working group together, I was the chair. So I called it, I was in the working group, it worked beautifully. Then Nancy took it over as the chair, but she was already part of the working group. You're not in the working group, so we would need to, first of all, yes, to add another member from Chatham, and then decide amongst ourselves who's going to actually lead. I mean, I suppose you could call it, but it might just be easier. I'll just, we could decide. I would probably say Nancy could call it, but.
I was going to say you
One of us could call it. Yeah, because we've both been involved in it, so I would, we can decide between the two of us on who does it. That
Okay.
way you're not, because I know you're coming in, and so we could do it as it would,
It would
like
be
we.
great if you
Right.
did that or did it together, whatever you'd like,
But yes is, and we do need another Chatham member.
Mm-hmm.
I guess at this stage, it would be Danielle or Jackie, really, because that's all we have at the moment. And then I would say yes, based on the conversation that the select board had,
Mm-hmm.
it sounded to me like I agree with Scott, I think we need to have one sooner than later.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could just take a moment to just echo something Terry said that I think is real important on this school committee situation. Terry said financing their own operation. So I think there's a difference between financing a school and actually running the school. And that is a concern I have, and I think that conversation needs longer because you're going to be without a superintendent. What are you going to do? And so anyway, I think that needs to be a longer conversation. So I think the working group needs to come together to decide what is our next step and what might be a longer-term conversation.
right. Because I think we could talk about it a lot, but I think that having all of the stakeholders at the table to discuss it would be more purposeful.
Okay.
Would it be appropriate for me to ask for a Chatham volunteer to add themselves to the working group?
I think so, because we're not voting, so yes. Oh, Jackie's got her
Jackie?
hand up.
Are you volunteering?
I think she's nominating.
What I would say is that with interviews for a new Chatham member coming up next week, that is something that can hold off another week in case that person is interested.
The,
So that's open to all four
the
members.
The only thing I
There's a
worry
lot of
about
that.
is Dr. Carpenter suggested that this meeting happens before the holidays, which only gives us 3 weeks, and to schedule that many people, I just wonder if, I don't know.
Can I offer a suggestion?
Sure.
So it might be possible for just Jackie or Danielle to just sit in the December meeting with the option of staying on if you choose, or passing it off to the new member when they come in, because we actually did that with somebody, I think, Joanne, because Joanne
Yeah,
originally was part of the working group. So when she left the committee, Joe stepped in. So we can certainly do that. That way it doesn't hold up a meeting, or put something on the calendar that comes after the
The
9th.
ninth.
Yeah.
Okay. Jackie?
Well, it'll be later than that.
Yeah.
Is there, I'm sorry, did I miss, is there a working group meeting already scheduled
No.
prior to the holidays?
It is not scheduled, but the suggestion is to have the meeting before the holidays because the first forum is on January 4th.
So that's fine, except that I know through correspondence with the interview process for the new committee member that we have the one available date that everybody could do prior to the holidays to interview these candidates. So it may be unrealistic to have the working group meet prior to the holidays. I'm just putting it out there, but I mean, it's fine.
Okay. Nancy?
So I'm going to take a step back.
Okay.
If we had, you guys had you and Michael had conversations with the Harwich Select Board and the Chatham Select Board, and both of them suggested the fact that it might behoove us to only deal with the financial piece in the regional agreement. We have conversations that Mark Terry had with Desi, who said, hey, that wouldn't be a bad idea. I think that using that information, that guidance from both select boards and our attorney and Desi, that we could make that decision to go forward with that. I don't think we need to have a working group conversation to decide what has already been suggested to us by both select boards. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have the working group. I'm just saying that because we have a forum starting on January 4th regarding the regional agreement for a vote for town meeting, I think it would be appropriate for us, not tonight, at our next meeting, to have a confirmation vote that this is what we're going to put forward as a red line version without the interim changes built into the regional agreement. At the same time, we continue with, and we wait until we have a new member, so we're meeting with the select board next Thursday, and then we wouldn't be voting that night for the new member, so potentially the new member might be here at our next meeting. So then we could, at that point, decide who would be on the working group to then schedule a working group for January. But I think that we're at a point where we have had this conversation, Scott and Michael have had this conversation with the select boards and our attorney and Desi to say, hey, this is probably a good idea. So I think it's up to us. Not up to us, but I think it would be appropriate for us to make that decision based on other conversations. And that way we're not waiting around for a working group that may or may not be able to be scheduled because the select board meeting was not able to be scheduled easily anyways. So.
Okay. Terry and then Danielle.
I was part of the working group, and there was some interesting, kind of energized stuff for a period of 8 or 9 months. So I initially thought that that may be the next best step. But Nancy, the more I listened to what you said, I agree with you. It probably will cause some people to, because in one sense, we call a working group and we get 8 or 9 people to agree or something. But the 2 or 3 points that, Tina, you brought up, and Scott had to answer to at the Chatham board about pre-K alone, school committee alone. I don't know if that's worth discussing at this stage by the working group to add them to the list because, as Nancy said, we've come this far. So partially my feeling was, as a Libra, I'm bending over backwards to try to satisfy a smaller group of folks to say, yeah, add some more topics, which I know where it will go. So my feeling would be here to a working group to consolidate, but I really feel we are in the position to, in 2 weeks, have a vote to move what has been done at both boards. Thank you.
Danielle.
I hear all that, and I think that makes a lot of sense. My concern is some of the questions that were raised during the meeting with the Chatham Select Board, that if we were to put forth just the proposed changes that deal with the assessment, that it wouldn't have the support of the Select Board at this point because it hasn't been teased out or addressed all of those other questions that have bubbled out of this. And I'm wondering if I hear that there's anxiety and fear that if we don't get this assessment piece figured out, basically at town meeting, there's a fear that, for lack of a better word, that the town of Harwich will hold the district's budget hostage and demand cuts to it because that assessment piece is a bargaining chip or they feel like they're subsidizing Chatham's elementary school. And I wonder if we all, or if there's a wide acknowledgement that this is moving forward and we want it to move forward in good faith, that we're trying to do the right thing to appease both towns. And I wonder how real that fear is, that Harwich would actually vote down the district's budget if this assessment piece wasn't able to be figured out, because we realize the nature of this is that it's more complex and it is bringing up all these questions. I hear and I understand that the school committee has been working on this for a long time and it was a goal and we wanted to, or you all wanted to make the changes to the regional agreement. I hear that, and I don't mean to devalue any of the work or the drive to get it passed and done. But I think what I'm coming into this new again, realize like this is a huge can of worms that it's kind of opening up. And I worry that if we were to put forth something and say, yep, we're going to go, that we want to just focus on the assessment, that the town of Chatham and the select board wouldn't support it. And then where would that leave us? So that's my fear. That's my anxiety. And so I guess I wonder if there is a true sense about the town of Chatham or the town of Harwich and where they are. You know, is that threat of demanding cuts to the district budget very real, or is it more of an internalized fear.
Terry?
A couple of comments, I have no inside knowledge. Danielle, it could be perceived that Howard would be held hostage because of what's been talking about. You use that term. One could argue that the last day or two a week of bringing up topics such as a separate school committee, Chatham is raising an issue holding the whole process hostage. They would have a great deal to gain. Another $600,000 or $8,000 they would have to come up with for next year, the next year after that, leading me to say, I'm not a town hall mouse that hangs around Howard's town hall, so I don't really know, but if I were a betting man, and I'm not, absolutely it's solid rock that our select board has been very aware of what's appearing to be not a good way to solve our assessment issue for the last 2 years. And they are anxiously hoping that this solution of the 2 elementary schools' finances could be solved via what has been discussed for the last 6-7 months. That's where they find themselves. If all of a sudden the select board, and right now I think they've been solidly behind, as was their meeting 2 weeks ago, to say, we're in agreement with it. They have not brought forward other citizens to their meeting saying, do you know that we're carrying 75% of a school that was at 250 that is now at 145, and it looks like it's going down? No, I didn't realize that. So, yes, that would be my opinion at this stage, but I think we would be facing a serious issue here.
Can I have Jackie go before you, Dr. Carpenter? Do you mind? Jackie?
Yeah, point of clarification, I guess. The point about the selectmen, and Terry, I understand where you're coming from, but the point about the selectmen now saying that we'll make our own school committee, I believe it was our superintendent who actually gave the selectmen the models of what it would look like if the Chatham Elementary School was broken out into its own school, not under, let's say, the district, I guess is how we're saying it. So I think they're working with the information of what the possibilities are. So I don't think that the Chatham selectmen are coming at it in a defensive way, because that's how I'm perceiving this conversation. That being said, I do believe I feel like a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, we were having this same conversation about the regional agreement. And despite the fact of how long we've been working on it, I think the moral of the story was that if more changes have to happen to the regional agreement, we can do that. It's just at this time, this is what we've prepared to change in the regional agreement. And the amount of time it's going to take for some of the changes potentially that Chatham's talking about or that we want to make, that's going to take time, which parallel to that, we can then be updating the regional agreement again. But I feel like with the information from the Chatham Select Board recently this week, I don't feel like that's a reason to stop and hold up the regional agreement right now in the process. We do need to go forward with that. And that's not knowing that we need to change more. It's going to be an ever evolving document. We all know that. But at this time, I think we've done a good job with its current evolution, and we need to move forward and close that door so that we can be prepared to envision what it's going to look like again going forward. Again, it's an evolving document. And as things start to change, and let's say we break Chatham Elementary out, or let's say there's a conversation about a separate school committee and all those things, we're going to be making a lot more changes to the regional agreement, but we can't hold it up just based on that at this time, is my opinion.
Just some little bits of information. So since we last met, the Harwich Selectmen did meet and talk about the regional agreement. I had texted their chairman, McCaskill. He said we didn't need to be there. They voted unanimously to support the financial pieces. So they have sent a strong signal. We're ready to move forward as a town on the financial piece. I know our next agenda item is the budget and assessment. And, but this is the superintendent trying to tie two conversations together with how it could potentially play out. I don't know whose town meeting's first this year, but let's say, for instance, we move this forward, the financial piece, as in the red line. Harwich Town, the Harwich Town meeting voters will vote a budget and, or will vote, to support an assessment that comes out of this budget presentation. Just to prepare all for sticker shock, as I have tried to foreshadow for everyone, the longer this goes, the bigger that number keeps getting in terms of what's getting offset, by the way the 75-25 split is. It's a lot bigger than last. The numbers we were talking about last year was FY22, and now we're on FY23. And so when you look at what the impact is to Harwich, keep in mind that if they vote the budget with the understanding that the financial piece, that they've passed the regional agreement, and here's the budget based on the finances as they understand it, and it's not supported in the next town, it's not just the delta that's in there, but it's the delta divided by 75%, because Harwich's piece gets cut, plus Chatham's share of that amount gets cut. So it ends up being a lot more. And then you could do the back of the Mouch book. School budgets are largely personnel costs, so you take that number, you divide by roughly 80,000, and that gives you a rough number of staff that we're then having to figure out, okay, how do we operate without that many staff? So we can get to that little exercise as it ties in, but it gets to be this very complex little thing that it's, they're a town, because for this, the way this little process will have to work forward, that Michael and I have been talking with our attorney and Desi, that that there's a process to have it be in place for this next fiscal year, but the town meeting is voting they're voting our budget based on a presumed change to the regional agreement, voting that regional agreement. And, it all starts to be these votes are interconnected. So if something fails somewhere, we're potentially having to go back to the drawing board and in a worst case scenario, under the big tent as.
Right. Sharon?
Yes, my question is on the timing. At our town meeting, we have the vote to pass our annual budget. And what is the timing, and is this all going to be tied together? So the two things will dovetail, and they'll be all blended together, so we don't have a problem with either the yearly or this. Do you know what I'm saying?
I think I understand her question.
You understand?
Yeah, I think if I'm understanding, Sharon, your question, are you talking about, because the way the article for the budget is usually Article 3 or 4, I can't recall, and then this
Yes.
assessment piece would probably be 5 or 6. Is that your question? About
Yes,
passing,
but
like,
not so much. Yes, that's true. Obviously, I would like those things voted all similarly at a similar time, but mainly I'm talking about getting the support of the selectmen and the finance committee for both of those, because if one goes wrong, it could impact the other. And I don't want to, I want this to go smoothly like everyone else does.
I think it would behoove us to then have a conversation with the select boards to make sure that However, the articles are designed, if there might be some wiggle room to order them or put them next to each other so that it doesn't get derailed by one vote or the other. I would almost picture the changes to the regional agreement and the assessment as Article 4, and then Monomoy Regional Budget as Article 5. That would be in my mind, so that you have to approve the amendment before we approve the budget, so that way, if the amendment's approved, then the budget matches properly. Is that kind of where you're going, Sharon?
The order, yep.
Okay.
So I'm wondering about next steps here, unless you had more to say.
I just have one more thing to say, it tied into the next step, because I want to remind everyone, just a year ago, we were having a same conversation. So, and the same conversation was Harwich wanted financial relief as quickly as possible. Chatham needed more time. Chatham wanted to see a longer-term plan, so we had to kind of negotiate this a little bit. We ended up giving in, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but we ended up kind of saying to Chatham, okay, we'll give you some more time. And we didn't get that fix for Harwich. Harwich was not happy about that at all. In fact, 2 of the Board of Selectmen members even said in casting their votes, I hesitate to vote yes, I want to vote no, but I'm going to say yes with the understanding that next year this gets fixed. So I just wanted to share that with you because we had to do some big time damage control, if you will. We really had to kind of nurture last year because Harwich was really ticked. So I just wanted to echo what Jackie was saying because I think we have to move ahead with the financial piece. We can still give Chatham time. We can still have these other conversations, but we really do have to address this financial thing this year. So that leads to a next step, which would be the working group, yeah, and having this conversation and make sure we're all on board of moving forward with some type of financial fix and still being able to have these bigger conversations.
Yeah. So are we okay with waiting till the new Chatham
Oh,
member?
Can we clarify? I thought Nancy, or I thought the suggestion on the table for moving forward was that as a committee, we essentially have done the work and could say we want to move forward with this piece. And that decision could lie outside of the working group. And then the working group meets after the new year?
Yep,
that-
that's what I was, yep.
Okay, I wasn't understanding you then, I'm
I
sorry.
started to stop too, and then I was like, oh, let me let.
Sorry.
So what Danielle said. But yes, so that we can wait, we can move forward with this, and we can wait until there's a new Chatham member, then volunteer to be part of the working group, and the working group could reconvene after the new year. Nancy?
Yes, I agree with what you're saying, and a suggestion is to have a consent, we don't have a vote on the agenda for this evening, but if we could have a consensus among the committee that we bring the regional agreement red line version to our next meeting for a vote only including the financial changes, the assessment changes that the Harwich Select Board has agreed to? Or do we want to not even be that detailed and just say that we understand that this, so normally our practice is we bring a document here and then talk about it and then we vote at our next meeting. And we're kind of missing that step. Although it's not a new document, we're actually just removing some of the changes. So I just want to be cautious to say that while we're not discussing it tonight, specifically at what we're going to vote on at the next meeting, we all are aware of what we're going to be talking about and voting on at our next meeting so that it's very clear. I'll
Okay.
stop.
So do we have a consensus to bring it back with just the financial pieces to our next meeting for a potential vote?
Yes, for me.
Yep, I'm good.
Yeah.
Anybody opposed?
Anyone opposed?
You could say without objection
Yeah.
as well.
Without
Yep.
objection? All right,
Okay.
okay. Leah, you got that? Oh, right. Okay, so moving on, under reports and discussion, we will go through the first draft of the Monomoy Regional School District FY23 budget and assessment. Welcome.
Good evening, everybody. Mike McMillan, a school business manager. So, prepared some slides to give you an overview of an initial draft of the budget. So I'm really trying to hedge my bets in that, it's the first draft. This is a working document. We're still working our way through this, and so this will change. It will change for a bunch of reasons, but it will change. This is not the final draft. All right, those are my excuses out of the way. Yes.
So I don't mean to speak about your predecessor, but Katie always started, this is the draft with a capital D. And she
Okay,
always
perfect.
said D all over it. It's the draft with a capital D.
Yeah, all right,
So
okay,
that's what I hear in my head when you're saying all
Yeah,
of that,
yeah.
so I had to share.
So you're comfortable with my level of anxiety about presenting these numbers? Okay. Great. All right, thank you. All right, so because I think as a superintendent so there is some big numbers in here which I think will cause my anxiety to come on to other people. So. So the current draft of the FY23 budget includes a 3.8% increase on the FY22 budget. So that's around $1.5 million. That's driven by contractual salary increases based on settled contracts. So that includes both the cost of living percentage increases and steps and lanes that staff are entitled to. It also includes benefit increases and us addressing some of the key budget priorities that we've identified, particularly staffing for the preschool program in a couple of different ways, which I'll talk about, and some instructional supply needs, which we hope to address. I wanted at this point to just highlight a couple of bright spots. One is that school choice and charter tuition numbers. So that is what I'm talking about here. Oh,
I know, now it's working. Okay.
can you go? There we go. Okay, so that is students who leave the district, either through the school choice program or to attend a charter school. Those numbers seemed, on the sort of initial numbers I've seen for this year, those numbers seem to have gone down a little, or at least they're stable. And so that will reduce how much money we are assessed to pay for those students, because the way it works is the state transfers money from us to the receiving schools, both under school choice and charter, to pay for those students' education. So those are big numbers. They're like $1 million and $1.1 million, and have gone up, been going up for a few years, but now seem to be leveling off and may even go down a little. So that's really, that really helps us out. I've not counted too much of a decrease there because I'm waiting to see how the numbers play out, but that's a positive. The other thing is, and we'll talk about, the federal funds to help us respond to ESSER are also helping us address some specific needs in the budget, particularly around instruction and health. Right. So this is my two slide summary, and then I'm going to go into more information. So that was generally the budget. So the assessment, that's how we then take that budget and split it up between the two towns. And this is really a capital D draft. But I tell you, one thing that's not draft is the foundation enrollment. And foundation enrollment really drives a lot of our assessment. And the way the assessment has worked, so there's two parts that rely on foundation enrollment. There's the state's minimum local contribution, which we don't have that yet. And then there's calculations we do to part of the operating budget, capital and debt. Transportation uses actual enrollment. The foundation enrollment figures we use are 3 years prior to this year. So for FY23 budget, we're looking at FY19, FY20, and FY21. As I'm sure you'll remember, FY21 was our big COVID year when we saw a big change in our enrollment. And Harwich's foundation enrollment fell by 1%, and Chatham's fell by 10%. And as that's partly what's driving the engine of the assessment, that shifts more funding over to Harwich, more of that assessment over to Harwich. And so because of that, their assessment would increase. That budget, when we broke it down and assess it to each town, it's a 5%, almost 5% increase for Harwich and a 1.7% increase for Chatham. And exactly how much that is, we'll go into in a little bit. So the budget development principles. So we aim, and this is, like I say, these will have more and more force on the budget as we start to go through the budget priorities and make those sorts of decisions. But it's driven by the strategic plan. We'll continue to maintain the long-standing class size guidelines. Our budget will be data-driven and transparent. We will be collaborative with staff, families, and the community, and so that, especially as we get into like the winter and start heading towards town meeting, we'll really start to try and seek out engagement with the community. We want to recognise and be respectful of the financial environment that both towns are facing, and I really want to develop a long-term 5-year projection look at the budget so we can see where it's going and how decisions about the assessment will impact long-term the budgets and assessments. So a couple of things I just wanted to highlight, a couple of budget assumptions that we're making. One is that enrollment will be relatively stable going from this year to next year. So we're not making any big changes. We know there's a general downward trend, but we're not making any major decisions based on big changes. As I mentioned, school choice and charter tuition costs. So right now I'm assuming they'll be pretty consistent with FY22 costs so far, which actually translates to a slight decrease in the budget because we budgeted higher than actuals this year. And that health insurance is assumed to increase by 6%. And that will have a big impact on the budget, as I'll talk about in a moment. And that, well, I'll come in. Okay. No, you're fine. So this is a chart which shows the total budget for the district since FY13 and whether there's been increases or mostly increases, just one decrease. So as you can see, 3.8% would be a relatively big increase in comparison with recent years. However, prior to FY20, it would be kind of right along, right in the ballpark of where we were seeing increases in those years. All right, so this is a kind of complicated slide, but I really like it. So bear with me while I just explain what it does. So this is the total increase in the budget from FY22 to FY23, broken down first by major accounts down on the left-hand side, and in each column is how much of that increase is seen in each building and at the district level. So for example, on the first line, benefits and fixed charges, at the moment we carry all our benefits, which is employee benefits, at the district level. And so that's where we're seeing the biggest increase. So that's $656,000. That's really, primarily, that's that 6% increase in health insurance. So that's just, we don't know what the increase is going to be. We'll find out for certain in like January, hopefully January, early February time. And then we'll know for certain how much that is. And that's based on the Cape Cod Municipal Health Group, which we're a member of. And there's, so this, up until a couple of years ago, we were seeing big increases in health insurance. Like 4 or 5 years ago, we were seeing big increases in health insurance. And it was like exploding everybody's budgets. But recently, the Cape Cod Municipal Health Group have had 0% increases. So that's really helped us out. This year, it was around 2%, I think, for FY21 to 22. But because the health group has a relatively big surplus, they had a premium holiday this year. So they increased rates, but then everybody only had to pay 11 payments instead of 12. So going into next year, it's so hard to tell. I feel like 6%. COVID is also having an impact on health insurance costs. I feel like 6% is maybe on the high side, but so that might come down. So but I make no promises. It could be much worse. So then, obviously, then teachers. So teachers are the next biggest increase, which is what you'd expect. It's one of the largest parts of our budget. There's the $54,000 at the district level is just because we budget an amount at the district level for column changes. So as staff have column changes, because we don't always know at this point exactly where they'll be. So we have a line at the district level, and then once we know where those column changes are, because people have to complete their education to complete the qualification to get the increase, then we transfer the budget to the appropriate line. So that's why you see an increase there, because the budget is compared to 0 now. There's an increase in Chatham Elementary School because that's just percentage increases for staff, plus, as we'll talk about in a little bit, we're carrying an additional or a new preschool position there, so 1 teacher. Harwich, there is one additional preschool, but there's a special education preschool position as well, and then also salary increases. Middle school, there's no additional staffing there, but there is salary increases, and actually there were some changes which actually reduced the budget. And then at the high school, that increase is due to they've got the highest number of staff, so it's really just percentage increases and a slight change in how school choice funds are applied, and that also applied at the middle school. So, we've received certain funds for school choice students that come here, and we apply that to their staffing budgets, and how that's applied can also impact budgets. But at the moment, we don't include any more staff at the high school.
Sorry, just a clarifying question. Can you, I'm assuming, but I don't want to assume anything,
Yeah.
the pink versus the red, does that mean degrees
Yeah.
of percentage
Yeah,
increase?
sorry, I should have explained that, yes. So so basically you go from dark red to dark green. The higher it is, the redder it is, and the lower it is, the greener it is.
Okay.
I won't go through all of these numbers, because it will become, if it isn't already, it will become tiresome. But, so yeah, no more staff at the high school, but it's mostly to do with staff, like new hires and percentage changes in salaries. So we have the most staff there at the high school. Instructional materials, equipment. So we've invested in the ARC program, a new curriculum. We have to purchase more supplies for that next year, and additional for a class. Unfortunately, if a class gets smaller, you don't get any money back because you already own the materials, but if a class is bigger as it goes into the next grade, you have to buy more materials for that grade. So we have to purchase more materials, and extending some of the programs in Chatham.
Michael,
Yes.
a question on seeing that we spent so much time.
Yeah.
Under instructional materials, equipment, technology, $52,000 and change for Chatham Elementary School.
Yes.
We all know the size of the school versus Harwich, which is $47,000.
Yeah. So they're also planning, and that's one of their budget priorities, which they've requested, which is included at the moment, which is an ARC reading room. So it's essentially guided reading program for students, so they can give out their appropriate grade books for students to read. And so it's like a curated library of books for students to help them with their reading.
So, just a quick question, and maybe this will come out later as we go, but with ESSER funding, it seems to me that the ARC reading room should be applied to ESSER funding and not part of the budget, if I'm understanding some of the
Yeah.
reasons to use it.
Yeah, so we could argue that it's addressing specific delays in development that caused through the absences through COVID. Yeah, so we're waiting on, we've not had our ESSER 3 funds approved yet. I mean, it's entitlement grant, so we get them, but they're just reviewing our application. So we're kind of in a slight holding pattern once we get an idea of what sort of things they're approving we'll be able to go back through and start making amendments and applying it to other parts of the budget. And that's the sort of thing when I capital D with a draft, that's definitely the sort of thing we're going through all these priorities and looking at how we can maximize the use of ESSER funds.
I was going to point out that the answer is yes, we could, and I think what this is sort of the budget, and as we move along in the process, and we hear from the towns where the fiscal wherewithal is, that's when we start looking at, how much excess and deficiency are we going to use this grant, so that we can figure out, like, how do we land the plane within the fiscal wherewithal of the two towns? So, so it's, that can, that piece of the conversation can happen and will as we get further along and get the feedback from the towns on what's going to take to land this, so we can get support from the voters and the select boards.
Thank you for that, because I am cheating a little bit, skipping ahead, and looking at that 5% increase on the challenge. I mean, the hard side, I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Anyway, but that's good.
No, I think you're right.
Very good.
Question mark, I think I know the answer, and it spins off of what Scott just said. There's a 156
Yeah.
total here. When you build a budget, you don't already throw X amount of E&D in it, similar to, say, what last year's was.
So, yes, I have done that.
So you do, okay.
I'll get that, but so E&D affects the assessment. It doesn't impact the budget. Does that make sense? So it's
Yeah.
all about how we pay for the budget.
Right.
So, yeah, I will show you in a few slides but I've been like, I knew I've been sidetracked by my slide because I like this one too much. So there's so much information. So I'll just highlight a couple more things. So programs with other school districts, that is a couple of things. That's school choice, charter school tuition, and also special education placements outside of the district. And that final area is the area that's driving that increase as we're looking to next year. We're seeing just a slight increase in the number of students and the severity of the placements of some of the students, and that's what's driving those costs. Other teaching services, that's one of those increases. We're seeing an increase in the number of instructional assistants required for a IEP for special education students. Instructional assistance is always really one of those things that changes a lot as you go through the process, because it's really driven by the needs of students and how best we serve those needs of individual students. And so we can end up, so some students might not need additional support, and so we can move those staff, so we are always moving, but that's definitely has been increasing recently. One more, I just want to highlight, I have included an increase for acquisition, improvement, and replacement of fixed assets. That's capital. So I just included that a little bit because if we're thinking about possibly doing the roofs, and when there's still to be some other funds remaining that we can spend on the other capital needs we have. All right, I'll go ahead.
Can I just,
Tina.
just one more question while we're on this page?
Yeah.
So the guidance, counseling, and testing looks like, if I'm reading this right, it went down, it's going down.
Yes.
It seems to me, with COVID and everything we've got going on with some of the social emotional, that guidance should be going up
Yeah.
unless,
Yeah, so at the moment, we don't have any increases in guidance. So this includes guidance and psychologists, or counselors and psychologists. There's no reduction, but we had been using sort of temporary staff to fill some psychologist positions because we've struggled to fill them. And they carried they were more expensive because, you didn't get a full person, so we were kind of slightly increased budget for those positions. But in the plan that we have going forward, we're able to kind of stabilize that budget, and so it's reduced.
okay,
Does that make sense?
Yep.
So we're not reducing the numbers, just how we're doing it.
okay.
All right. Oh, the one other thing the one last thing I'll talk about is that debt and retirement service. So that's to pay for the high school. So the high school debt, and the way the debt schedule goes, it actually goes down every year a little bit, so we get a little bit off our budget for that every year. All right, thank you.
Michael, on that question, I should know it, but there was a point during the bond on the new high school that do we buy into 25, Scott, or 20 years? First, there was discussion for 20 years, but then did we,
20,
Howard wanted to kick it up to 25? Okay, yeah. What year are we in? 5, 6?
yeah, so I think,
Okay.
what's this, 22? It's got about, yeah, I think it's like 2040, I think it's ends, so we've got ways to go, yeah.
6,
15
yeah.
years maybe. So these are this, I just wanted to reflect on the budget priorities. So one of the things I've been trying to do is just capture all the kind of notable, significant budget requests we receive from the principals and the directors, and that come through, you know, other work in the district. And so this is a constant changing table because new things happen, things come up. We started it in FY22 budget development last year, but we're always updating it. I just wanted to highlight, these are all the ones that we've managed to fund. So we funded them in a number of different ways. Some from the budget, as you approved, some from funds we had left at the end of last FY21, and some through school choice, and some through ESSER. And if you go to the next slide, I've pulled out the ones that are being funded from ESSER right now. So we have nurse at the high school, in the district, and math interventionists at the high school, and CES and HES. We also have a math interventionist in the middle school, but that's not been funded from ESSER at the moment.
Madam Chair, can I ask a quick question? So just for clarification, so budget priorities, so these are all funded. So the ELA curriculum, we have paid for that.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, good.
So yeah, so where it says funded 1 year, that's because it was a one-off.
Okay.
For
So
its 3
I just want to
years.
make sure it had been paid. Okay.
Yeah, and when it's 3 years, it's because it's ESSER funding, so we have funding just for 3 years for ESSER.
Okay.
And then if you go to the next couple of slides, so these are the budget priorities that this is a kind of updated priority list. So these are the items that have been requested by the principals. So this is where we're really trying, so now this is where we're really sweating the numbers, because we really want to fund as many of these as possible, either directly from the budget, either from ESSER, or from any other funds we can find. So, the one caution we have is trying to avoid using ESSER for too much salaries, because it's limited. I mean, so on one hand, we're really trying not to, but on the other hand, we are doing it because we're like, well, we have these funds available right now, and we have these needs that we can meet right now, so we have hired a lot of positions, but we are mindful that this funding will run out in 3 or 4, couple of years' time, and then we need to find the funding from elsewhere. Mm-hmm. So that's why we're not just like, yeah, just fund everything from ESSER, because then what? Mm-hmm. What's our long-term plan? So the budget does include a couple of these items. So the ones in the light green are funded in the 3.8% increase. The ones in the orange are not yet funded. So like I say, we'll try and fund them from, if we have, we'll go and sweat the numbers, I'll work with the principals to see if we can find reductions in other parts of their budget. Like the principal at Harwich has already told me that she can fund handwriting without tears, which is also already in the budget at Chatham, and we can fund that from her existing budget without adding to the 3.8%.
So I could do the math right now, but I don't want to. Do you have a sense of what is the total amount of budget priorities that are not, that are requested that are not funded yet?
Yeah.
Apparently you're doing the math.
Sorry.
All right.
Yeah, I am. I'm seeing if I have it right here, I can just tell you. Sorry, give me half a second and I'll find it. In the meantime, I think Sharon has her finger.
Are you ready to listen while you're?
Yeah.
Okay. Sharon, do you have a question?
She's speaking.
Sharon, I think you have to unmute.
Oh, sorry about that. I'm hoping, when I'm looking at this, that there isn't any program, personnel program cuts for next year. Is that correct?
That is correct. Nothing is cut.
Okay.
Nothing is cut. I was just thinking, we might have stopped doing something, but there's no budget reductions There are no education decisions driven by budget reductions. Does that make sense? So we're not cutting any programs or positions.
Well, yeah, so you're just addressing, I'm hoping that there are none, because I feel like our programs are very strong the way they are.
Yeah.
So I'm always for keeping what we have before we look at more things.
Yes.
And
Oh, I see what you mean.
the other thing is, one of the formats that we've seen in the past is, there was a, strongly want, really want, and would be nice. That's one of the slides that we have seen in other years. So the way you're doing this year, with who's ever working on this, isn't any kind of priority here. When I'm looking at 3.8, I would love for us to have everything. And if we can, that would be great. But I know that when we cut our budget to 1% last year, the selectmen, and I'm not sure about the finance committee, but the selectmen were overjoyed, and they are trying to get everybody to just have whatever they had last year. So that's why low amounts like that backfire sometimes. So I'm just a little bit baffled by this, because I don't have the background in where all this money is going to come from. If we have it, that's great.
So I can answer some of your questions. One is, nothing has been cut in order to deliver these programs. Some of these items have been included. At the moment, we have not prioritized it, except in that the ones that we've included in the budget are the highest priority, which is why we've included them in the budget at this point. We will work with the administration team to develop a prioritization. So to kind of answer that question, Sharon, we will have a priority list, and we'll seek to try and fund the highest priority items. I mean,
I appreciate that, and the curriculum things, just because of COVID, so I don't know, talking about ESSER funds, how that might come into play, but clearly with COVID, curriculum achievement has gone down for at least a number of kids, quite a number, and then there's probably not a school committee meeting that doesn't come out without me or somebody saying the counseling support for students. So, I don't know. I just would say that those are huge priorities that have come. I know that the school committee does have some say, or hopefully some influence on the budget. So, I'm just putting those two things forward. Thank you.
Thank you. So I would agree. So you have a lot of say. And so because of your support for a lot of the items that were on the previous list, they were almost all funded. So this is a new list, which we've just been developing recently. So, our aim is to fund as many of these as possible, but we don't have a blank check. We have to come up with a number that is respectful of the financial position of both towns. And we want to make sure that the decisions we make are data-driven, that we're making the best use of our funds. So, this is a first pass at this list. We'll keep coming back to it and honing it and making sure it's got the right items on there. So, and to curriculum, sorry, I was going to very quickly, we have hired 4 additional intervention staff in the last year. So I think the district is very mindful of those challenges and is meeting them with that investment. So I do have a number for you. Okay. So the number, the requested items are not in the budget or earmarked for ESSER yet, is like just shy of $600,000.
Tina and then Vinny.
Just a couple of questions on page 10. So curriculum specialist requested at 100,000. Can you tell me a little bit more about that specialist?
So yeah, so that is a district level position that we've been talking about for a couple of years that would help to coordinate curriculum throughout the district and professional development for staff, providing curriculum.
So a coordinator,
Yeah,
working
working
with Mark.
I think
Yes.
if you look at it, what Mark is doing is at times schizophrenic. You're
Okay.
one
A lot.
one moment on the elementary level, middle school
Yeah.
level, high school
Okay.
level, to, we have talked about, do we bring in somebody who's an elementary specialist, and that's going to be their focus, and, maybe have that help move the arc forward? Or do you bank it at the upper grade and have Mark's position focus at the lower level? It's again, just, I think one of the things that we can be proud of at Monomoy is we are a lean administrative machine relative to, I think, a lot of districts. And it means that many of us end up doing the things that, 2 or 3 other people, might do in, other school districts.
Okay, well, that's, thank you for that. And on the flip side of that, the 5th grade teaching position, are we short a 5th grade teacher? I mean,
So
what's
that's
going on?
Yeah, so that's one we want to, that was the middle school principal suggested it. We're revisiting it depending on enrollment
So,
numbers.
and this is one of those, if we went with Sharon's
Yeah.
descriptions of, nice to have or need to have, without it, we're within that guideline that we want to keep class sizes in, so it might be nice, we could lower things even more, but, but it's look at where things are, and, and as people saw the budget as it's already playing out, at the moment, there's a 5% there for Harwich, and that's, we have to be cognizant of. I don't think 5% is going to fly. So, so the nice to haves, aren't in here. And what we also see as a school year goes on, as Michael pointed out, there will be monies that are left at the end of years, and we can sit there and say, oh, I think Michael also already said that maybe the Harwich Elementary principal might have money for the handwriting without tears, but there'll be things that we can sit there and say, boom, boom, boom,
Yeah.
we can go fund these, which is why that previous slide that Michael had, there was a number of things that would have been, in orange this time last year that we've been able to go and pick them off the list because we were able to sort of creatively get it and still come in where we had forecasted, as we went through the budget process last year.
Okay, thank you. And then the other is the ELL teaching position, which it looks like it's at the middle school. So is this a second, or is this
So-
a first?
This would be a second. Our knows this better. We are looking
Oh.
at the level of ELL support provided
Right.
throughout the district and may need to make some
Okay.
changes to staffing to meet the needs in each building.
Mark Smith, Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment, also wear the hat of EL Director in the district.
Oh, there we go, okay.
So, so there, currently this year, we have a much higher level of EL students at the middle school. So this is the principal responding to that need. We're also, as part of, to the superintendent's, sort of dovetailing off the superintendent's earlier statement, we're also looking, though, at staffing levels across the district. So it may not be, the answer may not be add a staff, total FTE at the middle school. It may be, we may have the FTE staffing already in the district, because our total number of EL students in the district is actually down. So it may be we have the capacity, and we're actually currently having that conversation among the administrative team. We just may need to look at redistributing, I just made that word up, redistributing our existing staffing to better support the current level of need at the middle school.
Okay.
But, so that initial need came because there's a much higher percentage of students than caseload currently for that one teacher that exists. So to answer your question, no, there is a teacher at the middle school, but his caseload has blossomed this year. And it's more than one teacher can, and it's not just the number of students, it's the level of need of those particular students.
Yep.
So we need to, I think we have the capacity to respond internally.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Danielle?
This is a question on timing. So this list that's in front of us about the budget priorities, is the window, will any more requests be coming in? Or is it kind of like the
Well,
window
so-
existed to get in your budget requests and now this is what we work from moving forward?
No, so new priorities can come in, because things happen in the district. So one of the reasons for having this, and eventually having it in a priority order, is really so we're focused on what needs we've identified as a district. And we don't get like, we don't get, pulled in different directions. So if a new request does come up, then we're able to look back at the priority list and say, okay, does it trump everything else on this list now? And sometimes it might, and if not, but if it doesn't, then we don't just automatically fund it. We have to weigh up against the other items we've seen. But yeah, so definitely this list is changing all the time. I'd love to draw a line and say nobody can get anything else for the rest of the year, but and then sometimes things will come up and we'll find other ways of funding them.
And similar to the presentation that you shared with us recently about all the maintenance projects and the
Yes.
updates and everything, how you guys have this rubric that
Yeah.
you assign to help identify the priority level
Yeah.
and, whether something urgent or, is any sort of rubric like that applied to these budget priorities?
No, the short answer. It tends to be a kind of collective decision of the district leadership team and the principals kind of reviewing it, and partly because they're so different, these items. Some of them are almost like capital items, or some of them are equipment, some of them are textbooks, some of them are staffing. We are really encouraging principals and directors to make a data-based argument. So we had a great discussion with the principal Oldak at Harwich Elementary School about a position she was interested in, and she had all their data from testing in the school about the levels. So that's what we're aiming for, but we're kind of having that data-driven decision at kind of district level. I love the idea of having a criteria, so that is something I think I'd love to think about as well. All right. Okay, on to the next slide then. All right, so that was the easy bit. So now it gets complicated. So this is the current assessment methodology. So basically what I've done is I've taken that budget figure and put it into the current assessment methodology. I have updated the foundation enrollment figures and made some assumptions about revenue, in particular chapter 70. I think I assumed like a small percentage increase, which is money we get from the state based on our enrollment. I've also included the same level of excess and deficiency as we budgeted last year. So it's not been, so we've had our excess and deficiency essentially as money left over. Really high level, simple is the money we had left over at the end of the year. And it's like in a town, it's a bit like free cash, and it has to be certified by the state. So auditors come in and look at all our books, and they see if we have an excess or a deficiency, or they add up all our excesses and deficiencies and see the total. And ours, I think, is around 1.8 million this year. It can't be any more than 5% of your budget. I think ours will not be this year. And then we are allowed to, once it's been certified by the state, which should happen in January, we're allowed to count it towards our budget for the following year. So at 1.8 million, if we were to use $800,000 of that, I think that would be reasonable. And then it goes through the assessment, a methodology, as you've seen in the past. So it looks at the minimum local contribution, and really that's one of the biggest factors left to determine how this will actually play out, is the minimum local contribution figures from the state. So one thing that is interesting about that is that they actually are a little more up to date than we are with foundation enrollment. So they use this year's foundation enrollment, whereas we don't use, if we're looking for FY23, we use 19, 20, and 21. The state doesn't use an average and uses the most recent foundation enrollment, which for them will be FY22. And in FY22, things actually moved over to Harwich slightly. Harwich's enrollment went down a little, whereas Chatham's went up a little bit. Or, so the shift will be slightly over to Chatham. But we don't get those figures until January. So that number, where it says minimum local contribution, I've just assumed the same as last year because it's really hard to tell exactly where it's going to go at this point. And so when you go through and then basically you split the budget up based on that foundation enrollment figure, and the outcome is that increase you see at the very bottom, which is just shy of 5% for Harwich at $1.3 million for Harwich. And a little less than that for Chatham. So any questions about that? So I just wanted to, in the next slide, because it's such a big issue, I just wanted to highlight foundation enrollment. So the blue line, these are percentages. The blue bar is Harwich's share of the foundation enrollment. The orange is Chatham's, and the grey line is how Harwich's has changed each year. And that's mapped on the right-hand axis, because obviously but you can see how it's changed. So it actually did go down for a couple of years, but in the last 3 or 4 years has been increasing and is higher. So the increase this year is higher than the increase was in FY22. So it's a bigger swing to Harwich. Any questions while we go? So we obviously have before us, we were just discussing at the last agenda item, an alternative assessment methodology. So I wanted to just compare what the assessments would look like if we were using that methodology instead of the current one that's in place. So that I've only applied it to the operating budget. Now when we have the capital budget set and we know exactly which items are being in the capital plan, this might impact the capital plan as well. So for example, if we decide to go for the Chatham roof first instead of the middle school roof, then that will slide more money over to a Chatham's budget. But at the moment, I've just left that as it is in the traditional methodology. So right now, really, we're just looking at the impact of the changes to the operating budget assessment. And if you remember, basically what that does is that basically each town is responsible for its elementary school first.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So, for simplification purposes,
Yeah.
$931,000 is what Harwich is paying for Chatham Elementary School. If we don't change anything.
Yes, I mean, I guess at a really high level.
Very simplistic bottom line
essentially
kind of
that's probably
numbers.
a ballpark figure, because because under the current methodology, we don't look at the elementary schools first, and in one where we do, it shifts $900,000 off of Harwich. So that's obviously more than the $600,000 we talked about last year, which is unfortunate, and that's because the gaps got bigger, because the reason the assessment's up so much for Harwich is the same reason that the gap is now bigger than it was last year. Plus our budget has gone up as well, so we've increased the budget. So that obviously increases everybody's share of that budget.
Also, COLA, the cost of living increase is the highest that it's been in
I know.
very, very, very long time. I think that's a really important point to note that
Yeah.
I think it's 5.9%, where in years past it's been 2%. So that's really a very significant factor in the increase of salary, so much. So I don't think that should be understated, that
Yeah.
that's a big part of, I see that as a big part of budget increase.
I completely agree that it's going to be a factor for us. I think a lot of it depends on what happens, right? So where that rate goes over the coming months. We are protected a little bit from it, from a direct impact because we have contracts in place. So inflation's 5.6%. Well, that doesn't change what our COLA is on our contracts, which are settled for next year. It does have an indirect effect because people who we are hiring may argue for higher steps. So they can have an indirect effect, but we are protected a little bit from it. Where we're going to see it is our supplies and our other contracted services. And, so to be honest, where we'll see it, if this continues, where we'll see it is not so much in this budget figure, but we'll not be able to buy as much stuff as we planned next year, and then that might affect the FY24 budget, because then we start to revisit, actually we thought it was going to cost $10,000 for those widgets. It's actually now costing $15,000. We could only buy, 3/4 as many, so now we have to buy more and at a higher price the following year. Does that make sense? So I agree. So I am anxious about it, and I think I showed it in one of the previous presentations, because if this stays, then our dollars are worth less.
I Jay, you're correct, Danielle, but especially the last 5 months.
Yeah.
What has happened in a brief message regarding our dilemma that we're facing, Chatham, it added insult to injury. What was happening was still noticeable, but that 5.6 just jumped it to the point where you say, wow, just what we didn't need right around now.
All right.
And this is where I was going before, that the number is bigger than the 600. And then Harwich selectmen say, we'll support moving the language of the regional agreement forward. If it moves forward, gets voted by Harwich votes a budget based on this assessment methodology. It goes to Chatham. The Chatham taxpayers don't support this assessment methodology, and it falls back under the current regional agreement assessment methodology. We end up being the $900,000 short on the Harwich side, plus Chatham share, which is, so ends up being 1.2 million. And then the school superintendent's saying, okay, well, now we've got to figure out how to land the plane and educate kids with $1.2 million less, which, $80,000 a teacher is 15 teachers worth of staffing, because we could say, okay, well, we're not going to do writing, handwriting without tears. That was only $8,000. It's the staff that, when you look at those priorities, are the big numbers, and that's where it ends up hitting every kid in the district, not one town or the other.
So I'm going to go to the next slide. So, okay, so what are the next steps? So like I've been talking about, and as you have, raised, we have to review those priorities and requests, go back, I'm going line by line through the budget with each principal to make sure we are maximizing the use of the funds, not cutting anything, but just making sure there's no, that we're using them to meet our priorities. I also want to finalize the capital plan request. So Rick, Travers, and I have been working on that and looking at the timeline for the MSBA, and having a review of our roofs and so on to make sure we pursue the right projects. I think it looks like if we were to pursue a project with the MSBA, then we would have the cost of the feasibility study would be next year. So depending on how much that was, depending on how much a reimbursement rate was from MSBA, that would also impact our capital budget for next year. I want to develop those 5-year projections. I keep putting it out there because they're going to make me do it. So I want to see that, so we have a long-range plan. And then I'll update figures as information becomes available. So crucially, by the end of January, we'll have those Chapter 70 figures from the state. We'll have the minimum local contributions that each town has to pay. We'll have that will also firm up the foundation enrollment, and hopefully we'll have our health insurance rates. And these all may move things in kind of better and worse places. I think, hoping the net effect of all that will be to improve the bottom line, but there's always the possibility of surprise. And then by early March, I'll have a better idea of where the school choice and charter tuition figures are for this year, and that'll be making me kind of more comfortable about our prediction for next year. So if we feel that we can make any changes at that point, I will. So the next steps, so there's a couple of things. So you've seen this before. I just put this up to, so we'll go next. The red box is our next discussion, which is school committee budget discussion, and that's another school committee meeting. I mean, I had suggested, and this with the mention to the chair and to the superintendent, that if the school committee was interested, we could look to hold like a budget workshop in January where we could go through the budget in a bit more detail, because I always find it's very hard to go through the budget in any real kind of level of detail in these kind of meetings, whereas we could have a kind of focused workshop to do that. So I mentioned it kind of last minute to everybody. So I'm going to put that on for this. If everybody's amenable to that, we'll put it on for discussion at the next school committee meeting.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? So you're proposing a budget workshop?
Yes.
For us in the public or us?
Well, it'd be a public meeting.
A public.
But it would be primarily for the school. I mean, the primary function would be for school committee.
Okay.
It'd be like a, focused discussion. We always have a public hearing. That's required by law, and we will have that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's scheduled for kind of start of February. But I thought it might be helpful to have a meeting where we could sit down and go, as I say, it'd be a public meeting because it'd be a majority of the school committee there.
Okay. And that would be an additional meeting?
Yeah.
Or are you working, okay, it's an additional meeting. Okay. All right.
So
We could,
so we were thinking, it kind of came up after
but
the
yeah,
agenda went out for this meeting, so we'll bring it back at our next meeting to discuss, possibly vote, and possibly pick a date.
Okay. All right.
if people are interested.
Yeah.
Okay, and that is that.
So we did ask lots of questions throughout. Are there any follow-up questions, more discussion?
I'm afraid you
Terry?
have used your quota.
That's
I'm
right.
done.
I have a suggestion, and I realize the process, and first of all, accommodations. This is a terrific piece of document.
Thank you very much.
It's able to be followed, and I know it's early on, so we can see as best wishes turn out to be. So I understand all that. I wonder if, and it takes me back a lot of years, that we've been through budgets for several years, and there's a process or a dance that it begins to realize and crystallize around March. And at some point, I wonder, we've got 100, 200 staff people,
Yeah,
teachers, that unless they live in town and either they're not interested, but every year when we try to begin a negotiating process with staff to say, here we are, the fiscal health of our district, I wonder if the principals, I don't know what it would be like, second week of September after the budget's all taken care of and a new year begins, during like a PD class,
Yeah.
that you would do something not with wishes on it, but the final one,
Yeah.
maybe back-to-back one page, a real brief, that principals could have a staff meeting during PD, professional development and now to give the staff an overview each year of where we find ourselves.
yeah.
And maybe it's been done, but never, and I know 10, 18, 30% of the staff would say, my goodness, the math, I don't know where this would all be, but I wonder if it would be just a little bit more profitable to try something like that, where the principals in each building would take this on as after after things are settled, and we're gonna launch a new school year with the budget. It's already been voted.
I think
And then
that's,
somehow they set up a meeting where the staff is given some chance to look at it.
I think that's a great idea. I mean, I think anything we can do to engage people in the budget and the finances of the district, is definitely worth trying. So let me talk to the principals, give them that an idea and see what their thoughts are. But
So
I
tell us
definitely-
Terry's idea.
Well, it depends.
Our
If they like it-
award-winning Terry.
That's right.
If they like it, I'm claiming it.
Okay, Okay, thank you, Michael.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to number 5, the first reading, policy file JJF, also called DIB, student activity accounts. Anybody from policy committee want to walk us through this? Or is it just, it's our first read, so.
I'm happy to talk a little bit about this. So this is the policy of student activity accounts. A lot of what needed to be changed in this policy, and Michael, please jump in and correct me as needed, is there was an outdated, or our accounting system shifted. And so a lot of the language in here applied to that old accounting system, or how things were tracked. And so this tries to just kind of dovetail the policies to match the process, or not the processes, the new accounting systems in place. I think that's my Cliff's Notes.
So can I ask a question, I don't know, to Danielle or to Michael?
Sorry,
So basically, is it the same and just updated with the new system?
There were also, we had an audit done and there were some findings, and it corrects or includes the language recommended by the auditors.
Okay.
But the vast majority of it, and even some of those findings, were related to the fact that the system had changed while the policy had not.
Okay.
And essentially, what changed was, as is the case in many districts, student activities were managed within the school. So the principal is responsible for student activities, and they managed it and were tracking it like on spreadsheets or QuickBooks in the school. And there was a reconciliation process that happened in the district to make sure like the money was properly accounted for in the bank accounts. And what changed was we moved the whole system into our district accounting system. So it goes through the same requisition and purchase order process as everything else does. So that just updates to reflect that.
Great. Do I have a motion? No.
It's first read.
First read. So any further discussion?
I have one thought.
Okay.
First time I've glanced at it, so my bad. I guess Danielle, for the policy committee, the student travel, the third page.
Yeah.
Being somewhat health pessimistic, and I just quickly scanned it. Would it be wise to have a statement highlighting the pandemic era that we're under, that would state, what would it state, Danielle? I don't know.
Terry's idea.
I can't do everything. Again, I'm under an award cloud tonight. But I think my point, that we had a discussion 2 weeks ago about that, and I'm not recommending it, that 0.4 or whatever it is countries, why do we pause with all sorts of, your grandmother can come over with you and stay if you're sick? Alert the teacher looking for future travel. Down here it would say something to that effect, that highlight the potential of certain geographic areas being alert to pandemic higher levels that would be put under consideration by the principals or whoever it might be. I know that's no.
Yeah, I wonder if that would be something more like a student travel policy, a more broader, because this is specifically related to the account, like the activity accounts of the funding for it, and how it can be used and how it can be issued. And what I hear you saying is more about how we would want to have I guess, guidance in place in the case of a pandemic around travel? Or maybe I'm not understanding you correctly?
For example, number 3, the approved travel authorization ought to be submitted to the school principal, et cetera, et cetera. That would fall under, please note, but I offer it as a suggestion at 8 o'clock at night, so.
So if I can just hop in, there is another student travel policy which says certain travel has to be approved by school committee, which is exactly, I think, so that might be where that would be appropriate, because there might be travel which does not go through student activities. And so you would still want to capture that. So it does say, you know, the request should be in accordance with the policy established by school committee, which is established elsewhere.
Yes.
So that would be the student travel policy.
Yeah, I was just
Right.
trying to
Madam
read
Chair, I think in number 1, I believe it touches on that, the second sentence.
Yeah.
The request should be submitted, blah, blah, blah. The request should be approved by the school principal in accordance with policy established by the school committee.
Yeah.
So that kind of
JJ
ties,
The
yeah,
student travel,
So we connect
JJH.
it to
Yeah.
that travel,
yeah.
The student travel.
the student
It is
travel
a-
policy,
yeah.
so like an additional policy. Maybe the policy committee could take a peek at that.
Yes, we would be happy to.
All right, so can we move this to next week, next meeting to vote on with a
Yes.
potential vote? Excellent. Any subcommittee representative or liaison reports that I don't know about? Excellent. Moving on, Dr. Carpenter, you have the floor.
In terms of our recognitions, we'd like to thank the Sandpound Foundation for of Harwichport for their grant in the amount of $600 for the Harwich Observatory located at Harwich Elementary School. The grant was used to purchase a portable but powerful telescope ideal for conducting sky viewing programs at various locations. We'd also like to thank Harwich resident and former Harwich Middle School principal Mary Childress for her donation to the middle school band and golf team, a set of ladies Lynx Master golf irons, Lynx Master woods and irons, a Bundy student level clarinet, or 2 of those, and a Bundy student level trumpet, and a Bach student level trumpet. And in terms of our COVID report, you remember several meetings back when there was no tracking any cases in any of the schools. We put every Wednesday up onto our COVID dashboard and report out to the state how many active student and staff infections we're tracking. Currently, it's 2 at Chatham Elementary, 7 at Harwich Elementary, 6 at the middle school, 7 at the high school, 20 total. The pooled testing, and I have to give our nurses a lot of credit for letting the superintendent push forward and pool test before Thanksgiving. I felt it was really important that we do it to have all those students and staff that have been participating know that they're positive or negative, and thankfully nobody was positive when we sent the kids out the door and home for Thanksgiving with their families. When they came back afterwards at the beginning of this week, we did pool testing once again. We found 2 positive pools, and again, this is such a well-oiled machine. By 9 o'clock in the morning, we had identified the 2 positives on Tuesday morning. So, so the nurses swoop in, and I guess the Cape Cod Times was reaching out this morning to us to understand why Monomoy is one of the lone wolves in the area doing pool testing, and how are we doing it, and why can't others do it? Because I think at the moment on Cape Cod, it's Provincetown, Monomoy, Mashpee, and Lighthouse Charter School, and I was like, it's a lot of work, and I know Joy spends a lot of time helping. Tony London, spends well over a day of her work week is getting everything set, and I said we have it down to an art where young kids are able to do it themselves as little citizen scientists, and it's helping, but the numbers are growing, and COVID is definitely out there. On the plus side, Harwich Elementary School held a COVID clinic, or COVID vaccine clinic for the younger students yesterday. Anyone in the region was able to go sign up. I believe they gave out over 111 vaccines yesterday. And just in terms of, while the meeting's been going, the county sent its sort of, every few days they send the superintendents just where, what the infection rates are out there. it's a little frightening, but in just the last 2 days, there are 327 new infections on Cape Cod in just the last 2 days. At the peak of the pandemic last winter, right after the 1st of January, the region went over 400 only twice. So we're tracking at this point to eclipse where we were right before or going into the winter. And, you know, so I had a long meeting with our nurses today. I think there's just a lot of anxiety on, you know, it's like, what's it going to take for us to get through the next 3 weeks? And knock on wood, if we see similar trends to what we saw last year, things started to drop back down shortly after the new year, and we can only hope that, you know, we keep it together and that we see, you know, we see the downside. You know, we keep trying to stress to people, you know, stay home if sick, and, you know, the challenge is with young kids, the ones that we're picking up with the pooled testing. You know, parents aren't willingly wanting to send a sick child into school. You know, their child has something that they think may just be a slight runny nose or slight allergy symptoms, and that's, I think, with some of our younger students, that's how it's presenting, and even with, you know, some of our older students, particularly those that are vaccinated, you know, if there's a breakthrough infection, it tends to be mild, and then you have some folks who get that breakthrough infection, and it can be a doozy, and you know, so we're trying to do everything we can to keep folks you know, folks safe here in our classrooms, and but it's going to be a challenging next 3 weeks.
Any questions, comments? Danielle?
I have a question, and apologies if I should know this and I don't. I feel like maybe I should. When we do the pool testing, is the strand or the variant identified as part of that pool testing?
They don't differentiate. I think it just pulls up that it kicks out that it's that there's a positive sample. We don't find out, is it you know, whatever pre-Delta, Delta, or, you know, if it's going to be Omicron, but you know, so they're figuring out just if there's a positive. I think the state then has the capacity, you know, to go back in and pull swabs and sit there and say, okay, which variant was it? But that's not information we get.
Okay. And is that information, would that information be helpful? Or, I don't know, it's a genuine question.
I don't know. I don't know that it helps. I don't know that it helps us much. I think though it, you know, we'll hear, you know, more and more over the next several weeks what does Omicron do, and how, you know, is it displacing Delta or, you know, or not. You know, even as I was driving in here, you know, they were talking about just sort of the, you know, how they pick up the Omicron, you know, with PCR technology, and how it's different genetically from the past, you know, from the past one. So we'll see, but I think the county over time starts telling us, it's like, okay, you know, this is now the new dominant strain, but, you know, but at least this year, since we've been in school, we've been dealing with, you know, Delta being that dominant strain, which is clearly quite contagious.
All right, so moving on, we did have the presentation of the warrants, and I am looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
I would second that.
Roll call vote. Jackie?
Aye.
Sharon?
She doesn't want to leave.
Aye. I just couldn't find my mute.
That's okay. Danielle?
Aye.
Tina?
Aye.
Nancy?
Aye.
Terry?
Aye.
And I am an aye, and we will adjourn this meeting at 8:56.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.